and welcome to Let's Talk, the Military Family Town Hall, which is an open discussion on race and the impact on the military family. I am Bree Carroll, the 2020 Armed Forces Insurance Air Force Spouse of the Year, entrepreneur, and speaker. I will be one of your moderators for this evening. Joining me is Maxine Reyes, a combat veteran, military spouse, entrepreneur, and speaker. Between the two of us, we will be interviewing some of our leaders in the military family community. I'd like to bring a little context to the discussion by walking through some history. So in 1619, the first Africans landed in Virginia as slaves. It wasn't until President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, where he declared that all people held as slaves shall be free. During that time frame, 244 years, African Americans were considered property. Now today marks a very special day. It is Juneteenth, and if you're not sure what that is, hold tight. It wasn't until June 19th of 1865 when the last slaves held in Texas found out that the Emancipation Proclamation freed them. Yes, that's 2 years later after the federal order where these slaves finally discovered that they were free. Being that they were the final slaves who were freed, we actually celebrate this kind of as our Independence Day. So happy Juneteenth. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a huge win for civil rights and labor laws. It outlawed discrimination based on race, color, sex, religion, and national origin. It actually leveled the playing field for voter registration, and it prohibited racial segregation. That was 56 years ago, and today we are still fighting for justice and equal treatment. I say all of that to say that this one conversation in our town hall is not the end solution. We need to continue to have these conversations, but I hope that tonight's conversation brings about greater understanding. We have 400 years to overcome, and we're not going to do it overnight. I hope that you all lean in, enjoy the conversations. I hope it challenges you and stretches you a little bit so that we can all make our military community more unified so that we can be postured to be strong as we accomplish our mission. Our first town hall speaker is none other than Sarah Streyder. She is our 2020 Armed Forces Insurance Quantico Spouse of the Year. She is an advocate and organizer. She's the director of Secured Families Initiative and has a master's in public policy from Cambridge University. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on the town hall. We're just going to kick things off with just your initial thoughts and feelings around what is going on in the country and your perspective on that.
Yeah, so many different feelings and thoughts. Obviously, I'm heartbroken by the pain that Black Americans are experiencing both now and for centuries. I'm angry about the dismissive attitudes that I've seen both from some in political leadership and some in my personal life. I'm embarrassed, not only on a macro level about how our country's legacy of racism weakens our credibility to stand up for international human rights on the world stage, but I'm also embarrassed on a personal level that I have not prioritized racial justice enough in my work to date. I'm also hopeful that the fearless advocates I see everywhere around the world, even in different countries, standing up to risk to their own self in order to show solidarity and demand that enough is far past enough. And I'm determined to leverage the platform and resources that I do have toward better outcomes. that's a bit of a nutshell of all the different things that I'm feeling and thinking.
Yeah, I love how you even said, I guess what spoke to me is when you were talking about the credibility of our nation, how just looking at what we have going on here, you're absolutely right. That does send a message to our allies and our enemies, and it's something to be thoughtful of, especially as we try to navigate this very difficult time. So thank you for sharing that. I'd love for you to share a little bit of your background, your experience, kind of share, give people a glimpse of who you are and what expertise you bring to the table.
Sure. Sarah Streyder. I'm an active duty Air Force spouse, but a civilian myself. We've been in the Air Force for about 4 years and change. And professionally, I'm a public policy wonk / advocate. So I've worked in the federal government. I've worked at more local and state levels in advocacy. And in fact, I have done research for the United Nations Human Rights Council. So when I talk about wanting us to be good on international human rights, it comes from a very personal experience.
That's awesome. Yes.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we are no longer part of that council, but that is its own conversation. Yeah. So that's kind of my background, and the main platform and work that I do is around mobilizing military spouses and family members as active voters and advocates for their community, because we have a lot to share and contribute in terms of our stories and perspectives, and we have a lot more that we can do than I think a lot of us think we can, which I may touch on later.
No, that is fantastic. And that's really why we wanted you to be a part of this town hall, because you can give that perspective of how to advocate. But let's talk first about policy. How do you see policy as it plays a role in what's going on in our country right now?
Yeah. When I think of the term racism, the first thing that always comes to my mind is an example of overt bigotry. So someone using a racial slur or committing an act of violence towards someone based on the color of their skin. But that's far from the only kind of racism that we have in our country and around the world. There's also institutional racism, where our institutions, our systems, produce racist outcomes, either intentionally or unintentionally. And that comes from policy. So let me give a couple examples. Think of redlining, which was a series of policies that began around the 1930s, by which both government and private lenders would deny housing and other social services to minority families. As a result, housing up until today has remained really segregated based on different racial and ethnic groups.
Yeah.
And neighborhoods with a high proportion of minority residents, they have not received nearly as much as investment in them as mostly white neighborhoods have. That's an example of institutions producing racist outcomes. Another big example is on the topic of criminal justice. We know now that laws about mandatory minimums and three-strike laws, those are examples of policies that have led to disproportionate incarceration of Black and brown men in our country. Policies create really powerful default settings that are hard to fight against when you're an individual, and they perpetuate the attitudes and social norms that shape them in the first place. And we as a country have gone too long without critically analyzing the policies that a lot of us might think are keeping us safe, when in actuality they're putting Black women and men in more danger. So just because the way things are doesn't mean that's the way they can or should be. And so following the lead of advocacy organizations like, for instance, a Campaign Zero, who have outlined examples of how policy can actually positively shape interactions, especially between communities and local police enforcements, I think is a really important conversation to have.
Yeah, thank you for breaking that down. And those are some awesome examples of specifically how policy plays a role. So you mentioned a little bit about what policies of the past and that are currently in place that kind of don't help with our push towards going to an anti-racist movement. What can we do to affect change related to these policies?
Yeah. Well, step one is listen and learn, especially from the many Black leaders in our country that are showing the direction that policies should take. In our trainings at Secure Families Initiative at SFI, I always say you don't have to be a policy wonk who knows all the answers in order to raise your voice on an issue that you care about. And that is especially true for this issue in this moment, because so many community organizers and subject matter experts have already done the groundwork for that. So absorbing all of that which is out there about knowing the kinds of things that we want to direct our efforts toward is kind of an important first step. But then step two is simply to get involved. I forget who, but someone recently tweeted, advocacy is not a one-lane highway. There are multiple lanes that you can be in, and you don't have to be in all of them at once. What's most important is that you pick one and you step on the gas. And I really like that, because it's up to each of us to pick which lane or lanes, plural, that make most sense for us, whether that is showing up to a local protest or donating to organizations like Campaign Zero, supporting Black-owned businesses at a time where coronavirus has really hurt economically, or calling your member of Congress and or your local sheriff office to demand reform on issues that you see fit. All of these lanes have the potential to affect real, actual change. So find your lane and step on the gas. And I will just add one more thing. If you're white and want to be an effective ally, change starts by looking in the mirror. No matter how woke we think we are, we can and must always do better. So do your homework. Start with a Google search if you have questions before you quickly ping your friends of color, because these kinds of conversations can be exhausting. And along those lines, I think it's up to us to also, to never, of course, center ourselves in any of the organizing efforts. A role that we can play, though, is to take on really hard conversations with folks that we know and have access to, so that our Black sisters and brothers don't have to as often. Kind of tag team, cut them some slack sometimes. I've noticed that that's a role that I've been able to play sometimes, either in social media or in person. And I think that that's really a really valuable contribution that white allies can have.
Yeah, those are awesome. Those are some great areas of impact that I feel like can practically be done. And just to like drive the point home, you're saying even as military spouses that we're able to do this. And the reason why I ask, and you know what, I'll even come up on this one. The reason why I ask is because we did receive and take in some anonymous questions from our audience, the people that are watching right now for the live. And one person voiced a concern saying that some installation leadership implied that if spouses protested or if spouses go out into these areas that they would get arrested and that it would harm the active duty members' career. What are your thoughts on that as far as ways to really engage and use our voice? Because like you said, we do have a unique opportunity as being in this military community, as we are planted in different locations. What can we do?
Totally, a lot more than you think you can. And I am really alarmed, honestly, by that messaging that folks have received, because it certainly has no basis in any of the legal directives that we usually look to for guidance and rules about what's allowed and unallowed. So I will start by just kind of setting the paradigm real quick. If you're a spouse or a family member of someone in uniform, but you yourself are not in uniform or otherwise a federal employee, any of the rules that you typically think of do not apply to you. They govern your spouse and their activities. They do not govern you and yours. Now, there are times where your activities might overlap with your spouse's life and you have to be careful. I give some examples in some of the trainings we do, like if you were to have a shared email account, for instance, don't use that for political fundraising. If you live on base, there are rules about yard signs and political signage on your car as some examples. But in general, those rules, either Directive, I think 134410 and 1325.6, you can double check me later to make sure I have the numbers right, but both of those are the directives that either talk about partisan political activities or protest demonstration activities. And in both cases, that's the person who signed on the dotted line, not you. When it comes to protests in particular, if I can just drive home just one final point, being anti-racist is not a partisan activity. It is not political with a capital P, insofar as the DoD cares. This is nonpartisan. This is, social value, human rights related. So you should feel really, and I think we've seen a lot of leaders even within the military set that example. I mean, within our Air Force branch, you've seen, woohoo, Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Wright, and Chief of Staff Goldfein, who've really spearheaded a lot of tough conversations about race, demonstrating that this is perfectly compatible with the military's ethos. And finally, just in terms of political protests in general, the rules state that even the service member is allowed to get involved as long as certain qualifications are met. So if someone is threatening you with retribution, either you or your spouse, that is not based in fact, let us know, reach out, get someone to, if you need, get legal help to help you kind of fight against that, because that's wrong and should not be happening.
Right, and I'm glad that you drove that point home, that you are not the active duty member, and how you react may be different to what he or she is able to do in an active duty status. And I think it is good to get education on that. You mentioned that you had some training, so definitely we'll provide that information so that people can get involved, find out ways that they can advocate, ways to educate themselves via policy, and get connected with the people who are trying to make positive impact and do it in the right way. Because absolutely, we do not want, and me specifically, right, I definitely do not want spouses and families to come to a divide because they want to use their voice. I believe in safeguarding your marriage and your relationships, and I really do want you to be on the same page with your spouse when it comes to how you show support during these times. And that may take some tough conversations right in your homes, but that's okay too. That's a part of continuing those conversations, because this is race and the impact on the military family. It starts at home. It starts in the heart. Before you can change the world, you kind of have to have those conversations at home. So knowing what you can and cannot do is huge, but also having those conversations with your spouse to ensure that you guys are aligned in how you move forward is also a huge part of that too.
That's a great point, Bree. Thank you for flagging that. Yeah.
Yes. So Sarah, did you have any closing thoughts, any last tidbits that you maybe want everybody to take away from concepts of advocating or voting and policy?
I guess one more thing, back on the, in directive to folks who, like I said earlier, want to be white allies on a fight toward racial justice. One other thing I forgot to mention too, it's really important that you have an open heart to being wrong and to not getting it right the first time, but doing better the next time. Don't take it too personally or sensitively if someone corrects you or gently guides you somewhere else. Just know that it's all for the better. And if you truly want to be the most effective tool in the fight, best approach is to take that well. So let's not let other things get in the way of what we know are the outcomes that we're all fighting for.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It has been truly a pleasure to have you on. We are going to make sure to get our families connected with your programs and some other ways that they can advocate using their voice to vote and also move the needle forward in anti-racism so that it can improve all of our lives collectively. So thank you so much for being a part.
Thank you, Bree, for hosting this. This is fabulous.
Our next guest is Jennifer Brantley. Jennifer is an Air Force chaplain's wife, owner of More Than a Missus, creator of the Find Me mobile app, and host of the Discarded podcast. Jennifer, what are your feelings and thoughts around what is going on in our country as it relates to race, especially within our military community?
Well, Maxine, I will tell you that I think, like so many of you guys out there, I have had so many different feelings, so many different thoughts about recent events. Particularly, I think that I have been alternately overwhelmed, disheartened, and yet also invigorated. All in turn, it's been kind of a mishmash of emotions. I have been dismayed, I suppose, because there has been a lot of dismissal of the issue that exists as it relates to race. You know, people kind of dismissing it, not wanting to talk about it, which I think plays a huge part in why we are where we are right now with the current state of things. And then I've also been invigorated, especially with the military community and some of the responses that I've seen. A lot of military spouses have rallied around each other, and that has been heartening. But I hate to say it, it seems that sometimes that overwhelming feeling usurps everything. It overcomes everything because I'm seeing people speak in terms of extremes. So it's as though we're acting like the world exists in an extreme. And I think that plays a huge part maybe in human nature, because we want to be able to put things in a box and say, you know, this happens because of this. Oh, this is just, you know, people pulling the race card, it's X, Y, and Z. And it's not that simple. You know, race is not an issue that's that simple. It comes in not shades of gray, but shades of all colors. And color is beautiful. And that's why I think I'm seeing people say, you know, I don't see color. And I'm like, I want you to see color. You need to see color. Because if you don't see it, I guarantee that there is someone out there who sees color and sees it not in a positive light, but uses it for a nefarious reason. And if you are unwilling to see color and the issues that surround it, the impact that it has on everyday life, you cannot be part of the solution. So I've just been torn kind of in that way. I think that the focus of the issues has been deflected. I feel like it should be so simple. There's that Lauryn Hill song, it should all be so simple, but we make it so hard, you know? It should be easy. Love one another, have mutual respect for each other. It seems like it would be so easy, but it's not. The issue itself isn't simple because it isn't just about the death of one person. It isn't just about death or physical death. It's about systematic disparities, inequities in education and health, in housing, and the list goes on. There are just so many things that have been impacted by race, and we have to acknowledge that and see it for what it is and not be defensive about it, but be open to listening to each other and hearing each other. And there isn't a whole, I mean, there's a much larger degree of that going on right now, right? Which is great. It's great, especially in the military community. Those avenues have been opened up. But we have so far to go.
We do have ways to go. And you talking about seeing all colors. Unless you're blind, you have to see color, right. You know? Yeah. And so my thing is, whenever people bring that up, I said, see all colors, but also embrace them. Embrace all colors. And so this brings me to the next question is, has race impacted your business at all, or your experience as a military spouse?
Yeah, I would say that it has, not in the way that you might think. I think I have to say, though, first, of course, it's impacted me because I'm clearly an African-American woman. I'm a Black woman. So I have been the Black woman and the only Black woman in a room, the youngest, especially as an attorney in a corporate setting where I have had to put on a mask because someone has said something that's racially insensitive. I recall one instance that I always speak of when talking about this, because it's the biggest thing that sticks out for me is my employer, just out of college. I'm not yet an attorney, but working in public relations, someone that I loved, looked at me during a meeting and was, had been telling us that he'd had lunch the night before, or dinner the night before, with someone who shared my last name. And the comment he made when he looked at me was, what did they say? No relation, same plantation. Yeah.
Wow.
And it strikes me to this day because I had so much respect for him. But of course, that phrase harkens back to slavery.
Right.
It harkens back to Black people being on plantations as slaves and not being related to each other, but, taking on the name of their owner because they were property. And he said this to me in a professional meeting. So I've been impacted in that way.
What was your reaction?
As far as, at the time I was young, I was in my early 20s, and I don't recall that I said anything.
Wow. And
I actually don't think that anyone said anything. Afterwards, someone I remember came up to me and, just tried to make a joke of it and say, are you okay? And immediately after he said it, he kind of looked taken aback, this, old Southern gentleman, realized maybe what he said, but the fact that it flowed so easily off of the tongue, I think is an example in itself that this is still an issue. He's clearly used that line before, right?
Yeah.
So I think now, had I been in that situation, I would have been, a little more vocal, respectful, professional, but I would have said something.
And when you're in those environments too, you're not mature enough and you're not sure exactly how to respond to people like these, because they're controlling your employment, food on your table. So many people have done this and they've bite their tongues and just move forward. But now we're just not taking it anymore. We're speaking up, and because after a while it gets tiring. Yeah. I have several situations where I can share, but I won't share this. You're my guest, but I definitely can relate to it. I can definitely relate to it. And so with all that, what is one thing, everything that's going on in the country right now, what is one thing that you would like for people to take away from this moment, from this monumental time of the patriotism? We have patriotism, but people are talking about us protesting or folks protesting that's not patriotic, which indeed it is, because this is for unity of the nation. So what would you like for people to take away from this time?
I have been trying my best to think of one thing, and kind of just backtracking to your question about how my business has been affected. So I actually, before I get to the one thing, which, sorry, it won't be one thing.
It's okay, go ahead.
But, so, I created this app, Find Me Mobile, because I saw a gap for minority military spouses. And what the app does is it's meant to connect us to businesses that welcome our presence, our being minorities, and our dollars. And I felt that was important because so often military installations are in rural locations, where the things that we need are not available. But in creating this app, Maxine, I was terrified to tell people about it. I was terrified to say, hey, I've done this thing, because I know that some people don't understand why there's the need for something like that. But there is. But I had, I just saw last year, a friend of mine was eviscerated on social media for a group that she started that wasn't even just for minority spouses, it's for everyone. It just happens to have a lot of spouses in it. And she was picked apart for months. This went on for months. So I was terrified to do that, because while there has been a lot of support, so many spouses are so wonderful, even virtually. There is that degree where some people just don't get it, and there's a bit of bullying. And so I think that needs to be addressed and retracted in our community as well, our community being the military community, because it's all of ours. We need to see each other and recognize each other. And I guess that gets to your next question, which is, what is one thing I would hope for everyone to take away from what's going on right now? And that would be the need for, like you said, unity and healing. The need for our community to continue to band together as we so often do. You know, we always come together to support our airmen when they need something. We support each other when we're in need. And right now there is a segment of your population that is in need, has been in need, has tried to voice that need before and not truly been seen. So we just need you to listen, to understand, you know, what we're trying to convey about our experiences, and know this is not something that we made up. You know, we made up. It's not sudden. It's something that we've almost been repressing. Like my experience, suppressing my experience. I suppressed that, and multiple other experiences. And that gets to you. It takes a mental toll. So just realize, you know, that we are not, no one is attacking you. We just want to educate. We want to be one. And I guess that would be the main thing, just a need for healing and continued community, as we're so good at doing in the military community.
And I'll add, just love each other, you know, no matter where we're from. We have some of us who are immigrants like myself, and we're in this military community. We raise our right hands to serve, and our spouses are serving. And so we definitely should just love each other no matter what, and know that we are on one team. And that's how the country should be, just like majority of the military is, you know, that the goal is for us to remember we're one team. And so if we think of that in our country, then no one can topple us down, right? No one can topple us, because they see that we are a force to be reckoned with as a nation.
As a nation, as one, we are all together, and we're so much stronger together, and that should be the focus.
Yeah, I created a quote yesterday. My husband and I were talking about it, and it says, out of many, we are one. But I said, out of many, one love. Out of many people, we should all just love each other as one nation, right?
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us and for speaking to our audience. We truly appreciate you taking your time. You're in the UK, you're several hours ahead, but we appreciate you and your husband for your service. And you take care. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our military community tends to be a little more conservative in nature, and usually a part of those core values is an integration of faith. Here to talk a little bit about race and religion is none other than Megan Brown.
Good evening. I am Megan Brown. I am a seasoned military spouse of about 15 years. I'm a homeschool mom, I'm a military missionary, and I'm a Christian author and speaker. So thank you so much, Bree, for having me this evening.
Yes, thank you, Megan, for being here. It is an honor to have you on. Just with your background, your experience, you are one of the leading voices as a writer, even. So thank you for coming on and giving your perspective and adding to this open dialogue. So we're going to start off. I just want you to share a little bit of your thoughts and your feelings on what's going on in the country as it relates to race.
I mean, I think like many of us, there's such an experience through all spectrums of emotion. I mean, like many of us, I think I'm just as overwhelmed and experiencing all of these different kind of emotions together. There's an intense grief and a pain that I feel when we see so many of these voices crying out because they're suffering. Racism is real, and its presence in our culture and in our communities is still causing an immense amount of pain and distress. And so really, I think I'm just grieved and simultaneously making great efforts to pause and listen as we kind of explore this territory together.
Yeah, I think that's really big right now. I love how you said you're pausing and you're listening. And I think oftentimes as we walk through this as a military community, you know, our opinions and our backgrounds and just our experiences will give us different perspective, but there's so much power in just listening to what's happening, what's being said, and even if it is coming out of hurt. You know, a lot of people are speaking out of hurt right now, and I think when we can get that proximity of the people who are hurting and get closer and just open our ears and listen, I think we will empathize with what is happening more and find greater levels of understanding. So thank you for sharing that. That's very valuable, I think, right now. So I want to ask you, what or how do you feel religion has helped or hindered where we are now?
Man, that is such a loaded question, but I would love to kind of set up a framework that how I'm going to answer that. So I've been a believer for about 13 years. I became saved after I married a man in the military, and I jokingly say he drugged me to church. Like he drugged me to church.
Yeah.
And this very large, round man waddled his way up to the pulpit, and he began preaching through the book of Ephesians. And at the time, you know, he says, turn your Bibles to the pages of Ephesians. And I'm looking around and I'm like, what's an Ephesia? Thank God that the Bible in front of me had tabs. But he started talking about being predestined to sonship with Christ in faith. And I was a goner, right? And so over the last 12 years, I've really dedicated my adult life to the pursuit of understanding and knowing God's will. I'm a student at Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. I'm graduating with a ministry degree in leadership with a focus in theology and women's ministry. So a lot of the things that I believe are, well, I say a lot, all of the things that I believe are found in the pages of Scripture. And so there's this theological principle that as a Christian, I firmly grasp to and believe in, and that's called the Imago Dei. The Imago Dei is Latin for the image of God. It means that all people are made in his image and are deserving of honor and respect and protection. You know, there's a pastor, his name's Kevin DeYoung. He writes for the Gospel Coalition. He says it the best. He says every notion of racial superiority is blasphemous, a denial of the Imago Dei, that there's no place for racial prejudice or ethnic favoritism in the church, and where bigotry is based on skin color, it should be denounced and repented of. And so I think it's important to note that, unfortunately, historically, the church has been complicit in harboring prejudice and sometimes twisting the scriptures to pamper their own religiosity or sanction their hate.
Yeah.
And when this is done, it's completely wrong and it should be repented of. But today, we as Christians are called to be active participants in the conversation around race, to be active solutions and building relationships. And so I think that the church has a responsibility to stand in the gap, and really we should be leading the way in racial reconciliation, because we understand the sovereign will of God, that all people have an inherent dignity because they are made in his image, and we are called to love.
Yeah. And that message of love is a thread that goes throughout the entire Bible if you're a believer. And I love how you note that that text, that the Bible was used against people, and you can see it via the Crusades, via during slavery, how they would use scripture to control a group of people, talking about that master-servant relationship, and that was not the intent of the word. So I love how you have pointed that out and shown that even though it was a hindrance, right now we have the opportunity for it to propel and make right some things. So I think that that's a great perspective, and anyone who is a believer can take from that and kind of find their means of how to take responsibility, and even, like you said, some repentance for, you know, maybe where have I fallen short as a believer in this conversation of race, or in these actions or lack of action that I've been taking. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And there's a scripture that I am clinging desperately to in this season. So as a Christian, we believe that the Bible is authoritative. It has the answers to any human problem that we can bring. In this book, it's the beginning, the middle, and the end. All of it is about the redemptive story of Christ. And so we know how things begun and we know how things end. In the book of Revelation, which is the last book of the Bible, there's a chapter that I am trying to keep in the forefront of my mind and to fix my eyes upon as to how gospel-centered communicators and believers can cling to the truth. And it's in Revelation 7, and it starts in verse 9. And the title is A Great Multitude from Every Nation. After this, I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, all of the tribes and all peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. And I think that we can visualize this, right? Like, I'm going to be an Asian woman in heaven. There's going to be an excitement of seeing a great multitude that no one can number in unified white robes. And I think it's such an encouragement for today to know that we are working toward that. But also we can have a foretaste of that here. When we think about our Sunday morning worship services, when they open, we can stand before the throne saying, holy is the Lord and salvation belongs to him, together, unified. And what a beautiful picture that is for us to strive toward as believers.
Yeah, I think that gives great imagery to kind of what the goal is, that diversity, like it speaks of different tribes, different tongues. It's not showing a single group of people. And I think that's beautiful that you called out that portion of scripture and that imagery. So if you will, we're going to go to our last question, which is, how have you seen racism in the military spouse community or in the military community? I know we've talked about your experiences as a minority in this community, and just share a little bit of your story and your perspective.
Yeah. So my husband and I were married in 2006, and we've been stationed all over, predominantly in the South. I'm from Shreveport, Louisiana, right around the outside of Barksdale. And so I've grown up in the deep South, and I experienced it, pretty much my entire life, that it was painfully obvious that I was different. I remember asking my mom, who is white, my mom is white, my dad was Thai. And so I remember asking at a very young age, Mom, can I dye my hair? I want to be blonde. I want blue eyes. I want to look like the little girls in my class. And I mean, obviously, my hair's pitch black and now, fabulous shades of red. But it was just one of those things that I wanted to look like the people around me, and I didn't know any better. And as I grew up and as I just kind of was immersed in different cultures all over the country as a military spouse, I saw racism take many forms. There's some serious stereotyping and prejudice about Asian Americans in the military community. I moved into a neighborhood, this wasn't very long ago, it was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Yeah. And my next door neighbor said, I thought you were a commissary Asian. And then you opened your mouth and you sounded like a trucker. And I was really confused. And I thought, that's a heck of a way to meet somebody. Wow. Hey, hi, I'm your neighbor and my kids are Asian too. So don't say that, what do you do? And then I experienced it in our community. As a believer, I believe in biblical community. I believe in doing life with the people around us. And so I had a very close friend who lived across the street from me. And when we would go shopping, people would follow her. And it broke my heart. I really didn't know how to be encouraging other than to confirm that behavior was wrong and that, she's valuable and loved. And
your friend was an African American.
Yes. And so really the best way that I can say it, Matt Chandler said this, in a racial reconciliation panel, but empathy requires proximity. And I think that, you know, as we're seeing on social media, there are a lot of people that are sympathizing with this struggle. But I think empathy is different. Empathy is sitting in that pain with someone. You know, my African-American friend, my neighbor, we had the conversation about what it was going to be like for her to have the talk with her son. And I could see the pain in her eyes because I'm sitting across the coffee table from her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we need to realize as military spouses that we have power in relationships.
Yes.
That empathy requires proximity, and it also requires sacrifice. It requires us to sit in these painful places and to listen. And so what I want to do is to give a call to action to military spouses, minority or no. If your community looks just like you, sounds just like you may be missing the mark a little bit and missing an opportunity to really be the hands and feet of reconciliation, to be salt and light. And I know that's a little bit of Christianese, but salt and light really just means to be truth and preservation, to be truthful and loving and kind and preserving the things that are good, i.e. love, and care and compassion within relationships. And so I guess what I'm asking is that we would consider our communities. Where are we planted? Who are we pouring into? Who are we loving well? And if it's only people that look and sound like us, we may need to expand a little bit, and to really be part of the solution of reconciliation, from a place of understanding, empathy, and unity. And I love what you said earlier. Unity is not uniformity. When we think about this unified voice, they're not all the same. And so I really appreciate you hosting this panel and giving us an opportunity to create those conversation points, Bree. This is amazing.
Yes, thank you so much. I think you are so right. And I love how we have the unique opportunity as a military community to get planted in different areas.
Yes.
And I think with your call to action, if anybody is wondering a practical way to do that, start with service. There are a lot of communities probably near your installation who have minority groups, who have communities that are impoverished, or have communities that don't look like you. Try serving there. That's how you can get in that proximity. That's how you'll gain empathy. That's how you'll get a different perspective and join that united voice, and with your difference in background. Because I think right now, and one of the highlights is that, excuse me, everybody's voice matters right now. And when we are silent for too long, we do want you to be silent and listen, of course, but when you are silent for too long and you are not becoming a part of the change in that narrative, then you are hurting and you are hindering the opportunity that we have right now. So thank you, Megan, so much for lending your voice, for speaking truth. I hope that people hear your heart that comes from this, just as a person who's been discriminated against, who has been put in a box of what they think who you are based off of how you look. So thank you for sharing that. I know that is a sensitive subject for you as well. So I just appreciate you being a part. If you have any other thoughts or any closing remarks, please share that with us now.
Absolutely. I love what you were talking about is that we have the unique opportunity to be planted anywhere. And really one of the things that is in the forefront of my mind is that I believe that God is in fierce pursuit of the military community, that there's a revival pending on the horizon, and that the military community will have an essential and vital role in carrying it out, just because of the fact that we are perfectly positioned for this purpose. We move every 2 to 4 years. We pack up, bubble wrap our feelings, and jump in the moving truck. And good old Uncle Sam sends us all over God's green earth.
Oh yeah.
What if we had a message of peace? What if we had a message of hope? What if we could be gospel-centered communicators in all of these spaces. Every time we turn around, we have the opportunity to bring a message of hope and of reconciliation and of love to the masses. And I think that if we believe that God is sovereign, which basically just means that he is in charge, right? He's placed us in this lifestyle and equipped us to walk this out well. We can carry this gospel wherever we go, and we can be the change that we want to see.
Yeah.
I think that that's one of the biggest things that we can do is to marry our action with intention. We want to see a world healed. Well, we can roll up our sleeves and mobilize.
That's right. I love that. Thank you so much, Megan.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Our next guest is Charlynda Scales. She's a CEO of Mud Sauce and an Air Force officer. Charlynda, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Looking forward to this talk on race in our military community. How have the events of the last few weeks impacted you personally?
Well, there was a lot of emotion these last couple weeks, and I don't, you know this, but many people don't know. I became a new mom around March timeframe. I had a son. My son is Black. Mm-hmm. I'm Black and half Nigerian actually too. And for me, I told people like there's an invisible angst, a feeling in the pit of your heart. It's almost like you're carrying the sadness of not only how you feel, but how your parents felt and how your grandparents felt and the ancestors before you. You're carrying their pain with you inside as you see this happening, because you know you are your ancestors' wildest dreams, and their wildest dreams for any Black parent is to see your child grow up in a world where racism doesn't exist, where inequality doesn't exist, and all the things that we've strived to do over the past few decades is to create a country like that. And so there's the pain when you see that that goal has not yet been accomplished. That's basically how I could describe that feeling. Was there's so much to do, and you get so shocked that we're so far from being where that dream is.
Mm-hmm. I can absolutely relate. And you having a son, a Black son, and knowing that all of these things are happening to Black men, it has to be disheartening for you. And we definitely need some encouragement now in this, in times like these. Encouragement is the big thing with young ones coming up. I'm sure you're worried about him. I don't have a son, but I have brothers, I have uncles, and my father, so that's definitely a concern. And having a son, even I think it's a higher concern.
Yes. We talk about in our families how we have the talk, and I think every family has a talk, but with Black families, it is different because there's that moment where you have to tell them people in our culture and of our race have died even when they complied with the law, mm-hmm. even when they did everything that they were supposed to do. They've still, like Philandro Castile, shot in front of his wife and child, mm-hmm. and he was reaching for paperwork that they asked him for. Mm-hmm. So, things like that can happen. This gives you a fear, and you work so hard to make these changes, like your mother and your grandfather's generation, everyone before you, because you don't want your child you don't want to have that conversation with your child that just living your life is dangerous. Being who you are is dangerous, even though you are an American in the land of the free. You still have to watch your back.
Right. So it's hard to move forward after thinking about all the things that could happen to your own child, mm-hmm. But we're going to go into talk about business now that we've shared that you're CEO of Mud Sauce. What changes have you seen in your business as a Black entrepreneur?
Well, I have to say, from a business standpoint, I feel really optimistic, Maxine, seriously. What this has done, and this happens in our country, we have a history of this, there's a wake-up call. Mm-hmm. There's a wake-up call that some of the things that we have been back and forth and at war within ourselves, it's petty. and we need to help each other. You know, united we stand, divided we fall. And our Black-owned businesses are still small businesses that contribute to the local economy. So we have to uplift them as well. And I've seen more of that in the last couple of weeks. And that's really encouraging. For my business, I've had people sharing articles about the company. We've had a lot of people going online and purchasing their mud sauce for the summer. And so, you know, I want to think that it's not just because I'm a Black-owned business, but even if it's because these are Black-owned businesses, I'm glad that they're seeing that they need support too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so can you provide our viewers, say, 2 ways that we can improve racial disparities and the impact on Black-owned businesses?
Sure. I would say the first thing is to keep talking about it. You know, we can't let this be a topic that we slide under the rug because it keeps coming back. We have, you know, Emmett Till, MLK, all these things, Rodney King. We'll talk about it. It surges, it goes away, it comes back. We have to address it. We have to get the whole nation on one accord and not in denial. That is the biggest thing that I'm seeing in the conversation is do not be in denial about the existence of systemic racism. The moment that we can accept that it is a thing is the moment that we can start eradicating that thing. And so I would just tell people, continue to talk and don't be in denial. Work together to eliminate it. We can't do it on our own. Black people and Black-owned businesses, we cannot eradicate racism on our own. It will take every race of American in the country to work together.
Have the conversation and work side by side with us so we can move forward. And those are all ways to move forward, because that's what I was going to say. Hey, what are some of your thoughts as far as ways to move forward? But you just said it, you know, you just said it.
Yes.
And anything else that you'd like to share with our audience or last thoughts?
I just pray that my generation is the last generation that has to go through this. I'm really hoping that my son grows up in the generation where he doesn't even understand the concept of racism because we've done away with it. So yeah. I welcome anyone to have a conversation with me. You can always reach out and contact me. I will remain open. I will keep talking, and you'll always have an ally in me.
Awesome, Charlynda. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule and away from baby boy to join us on this very important conversation on race relations in our military community. It is important to talk about, and brave ones like you are willing to step up. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for everything that you've been doing in the military community, my dear, and we appreciate you. Keep up the great work.
Roger that.
All right, have a great one.
You too.
Thank you.
Next, we are speaking with Bianna Keilar. She is a military spouse and senior political correspondent for CNN in Washington, D.C. She's also the anchor for CNN Right Now, which airs weekly at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Let's chat with Bianna.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I just really wanted to hear from your perspective of covering a lot of the stories regarding race. What is your perspective and your feelings kind of on the state of this nation?
You know, I've been covering every day for 2 hours what we've seen going on since George Floyd died. And I think we've been having a lot of conversations that were overdue. And I think that we're having discussions that are more nuanced. You know, we're seeing video after video. There's sort of a feeling I have as a news person, because I know some people have a hard time with watching some of what we've seen with Black men dying at the hands of police. And as news people, you know, we don't have the option to turn away from those videos. And I think that's also very important, because it keeps you very much in touch with what's going on and asking questions. And I think one of the things as we cover this so intensively that I have wanted to focus on is what happens over the entirety of some of these videos, because I'm also interested in what is the interaction like between police and between someone that they might pull over. I frequently ask myself the question, is this Black person being treated as a white person would be treated? If it's possible that it's not, does that somehow impact this situation? Also, just the understanding and the distrust now that I think so many people are realizing more about, that many members of the Black community have of police, just the feeling of when police show up, that different Americans are going to feel differently, right? Some people are going to feel under threat. Some people are going to feel put at ease. And that's a different experience for Americans, depending on your background. I also have been thinking about this as a mother. I have two little boys, 2 and 4, and one is Hispanic and one is Black and Hispanic. And it struck me, and it's even hard for me to talk about at times. I at times have just thought, I'm so glad they're so little right now. And I'm so afraid too what they could confront that maybe I can't even imagine, right? And one of the things that I thought of as a mom was recently watching a video of a 13 and a 15-year-old in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who encountered police who detained them for jaywalking. And they are in a street that doesn't have sidewalks. This isn't a busy street. There's questions about why they were detained. And I thought about it in terms of especially the 13-year-old who was having a physical encounter with police. And I thought, on one hand, we'll have sort of this straightforward law enforcement perspective sometimes where, someone in law enforcement might say, or even a mother who just wants their child to be safe would say, why is that boy kicking this police officer? And then on the other hand, and I think people are having this discussion more and more, what does it mean to be 13 years old and feel that you have been profiled and that you should not have been detained like this? And what does that do to your dignity?
Yes.
I think for me, these are questions that I'm asking more and more because I do have 2 little boys of color, and I think about what that would mean for them if they had those experiences. And then I think one of the last things that I'm thinking about is just as a journalist, we're covering marches, right? We're covering videos that tell us the story of questions about police use of force being racially motivated. What are we going to do when we talk about systemic racism, right? What about Black jobs and unemployment, and for other people of color as well? What does this mean for education? What does this mean for where you end up living or where you might be steered to live? What does this mean when you go into a store? What kind of service do you get, right? What are all of these questions? What are the different experiences? And even more so coronavirus, right? That's the other big story we're in the middle of. What does it mean to be Black or brown in the middle of coronavirus? We're seeing Black and brown Americans die at disproportionate numbers. I interviewed the wife of a patient transporter at a New York hotel weeks ago, and he had died. And part of the question about folks working at hospitals, it's not just doctors and nurses, right? You have many people. There's a janitorial staff. They're doing such important work. They're often the unsung heroes of this. Police, or I would say doctors and nurses have tried to really raise them up because it's maybe they're folks that a lot of people don't think of, right? They think of only the doctors and nurses, but they're at considerable risk. And in some cases, they didn't get the protection that even doctors and nurses were struggling to get at the beginning. They tend to be Americans of color disproportionately. And so they're being put at risk. These are the kinds of stories that I think we need to keep talking about.
But I love how you said that. And if I could just foot stomp that, you mentioned covering the story from the starting point throughout to an end. And I know it may seem like a lot in the media. People are feeling like they're getting inundated with a lot of information, a lot of coverage. But the importance of that, like you said, it's more than just the act or an unjust act, but it's following it through to see if justice is served on the back end. It's following the stories of these people who are putting their lives at risk and showing that disproportionate rate, like you're saying, telling those stories. And I think the media has done, and if I can call out CNN specifically, has done an amazing job of showing the stories in a way that everyone can learn and gain some understanding, because they're following it through in all the steps. And I'll also foot stomp that those dual hats that you're wearing as you're seeing and covering these stories as a mom, and then also as a journalist. You want to show the integrity and the truth in the story, and you're also considering those hard things of, well, what if this is my child, or like you mentioned, I have little ones as well, and I find myself struggling to have that conversation. We haven't clearly had that conversation because I just feel like they're too young to fully understand. But like you, I look at the young men who had those interactions, and I do have concerns for my children. So thank you for sharing that perspective of one, covering those stories throughout, which is so important right now. And then two, knowing that everyone involved is bringing some different perspective to it, because we are wearing different hats, especially our military community and those who are called in to protect certain areas. And I know you did an article all about that, getting the perspective of our military spouses and military families. Can you share a little bit about what you found out in interviewing them and hearing their stories?
Sure. So I had a number of military spouses reach out to me and tell me that they wanted to talk about, from their perspective, what they saw going on in the country. These were spouses who contacted me after the question of whether active duty military was going to be used to deal with protests. And this was after the National Guard joined federal law enforcement and Secret Service in forcibly pushing back peaceful protesters, organizations that in the process of this used pepper balls and flashbangs near the White House. This was something that, look, not uniformly, not all military spouses, but enough for many military spouses that they wanted to talk about this. And there's a growing number of military spouses who are deeply concerned and supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement. So I spoke with them because there were a number of them who have been marching in protests all across the country like it's their jobs, right? This has been happening in Anchorage, California. This is happening in Omaha. It's happening in Washington, D.C. I spoke with one spouse, a Navy spouse whose husband is a helicopter pilot. And she told me that she was thankful that he was deployed because she had heard the helicopters kind of whirring over Washington, D.C. And to her, the idea was so unsettling that that could be him patrolling Americans. That to her really violated a agreement that this country has with its service members. I ended up speaking to, I think, 11 spouses, men and women. They represented all 5 of the service branches. Some of them were veterans themselves. Many of them had biracial children. And so they had this concern, just I think the regular concern that protesters or allies of Black Lives Matter have, which is they're frustrated with the status quo as they see law enforcement and its relationship to Black Americans and people of color writ large. But then they also, I heard a lot of spouses also voicing concern because then they felt that the military was being brought into it and politicized. And that was something that just did not sit well with them. They felt that this sort of violated the purpose of the military. And look, I can tell you, covering this as a military spouse, as soon as I saw that happening, that to me, and look, I know that there are going to be military families on both sides of this debate. It's a very divisive debate, but you can't argue with the fact that that was an extraordinary use of military force or a consideration of military force, right? There were troops that were mobilized. They were not in the end activated or deployed, but they were mobilized so that they could be. And that was something that was very extraordinary.
Yeah, I think that that's a tough place to be, especially as military families who proudly serve and proudly answer the call. And I think a lot of times when we're looking at situations like this, they have to keep in perspective duty in just what they are experiencing as they respond, right? So I love that you covered that. We'll definitely provide a link so that you can see the article that was so wonderfully written. It gave a voice to our military spouses, and oftentimes is an unheard voice, which is why we have forums like this, so that we can talk and we can just have the conversations of truly showing how we feel as it relates to this discussion on race and how we are involved. Because like you mentioned, when we got the order, that's not something that we can protest against, right? Your active duty members will respond. They will act professionally and serve as they proudly do. And it just made it very, like you said, divisive. It kind of divided the community a little bit and people's thoughts and feelings of, is this the right call for our uniform wearing members to be in these positions? Because oftentimes I think the average civilian can't separate these matters. And then you have our military who get lumped into this picture of all police officers are bad, which we know is not true. Now our military members are seen in line with this enemy that people have conceptualized as police officers or uniform wearing members, and that's just not the case. And I think it's really good to give a voice to, like you said, those spouses who are extremely active. They are out there in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And unfortunately, our civilian counterparts cannot see or cannot differentiate the difference in when the active duty member is just called to serve in that way and their support towards this movement.
Yeah, it is orders, right? So if you're called up, you go. And also, talking to military spouses who support Black Lives Matter, they admit that they've gotten blowback in military spouse forums. They don't think that they are the majority view. They think they're the minority view in the military family community, but they're also not a small group, right? So this is not, the military community is not monolithic on what is going on in our country right now. They also have their divisions that we see across the country. And I think it was just so interesting to be able to talk to a pretty sizable, but a minority view that was trying to come to terms, it is trying to come to terms with, how are you part of a military family where normally you don't get involved in politics and you may not even really feel called to, but a lot of spouses found themselves in this unusual situation of feeling compelled to speak up. And that was sort of new, uncharted territory for them.
Right. And I have seen that on Facebook groups and what have you, there are a lot of forums that are now popping up with military families for Black Lives Matter, military spouses for Black Lives Matter. I believe there's a military spouse network for Black Lives Matter. So search out groups and find different ways and different opportunities to educate yourself, and also to partner with like-minded spouses who may have the same feeling or convictions and want to advocate as you do. But you're absolutely right. These tend to be viewed as a minority group who are speaking out and acting. But I love that you gave a voice to them during that story. So if I could ask, just in closing, what do you feel like is your big takeaway that you hope that our military families gain from the coverage of race via the media, or just the articles that are coming out? What should be their big takeaway or a message that you hope resonates with our military families?
Well, I think, you know, watching from the news perspective, we're seeing a conversation happening where it's hard sometimes to draw. It's not really a conversation. You know, there are folks over here who feel this way, and there's folks over there who feel that way, and it feels like they're never going to agree. And yet it seems like a conversation has to happen. I don't think that folks can look at what is going on and feel in the pit of their stomach, you know, when they watch the George Floyd video. How do you watch that and say this is okay, right? So that's, I think, an area where I think part of the reason that we've seen so much discussion about this issue is because there is majority agreement on that. The thing I would say that I think with military families, you know, as someone who's just observing the national conversation, and then as someone who is a military spouse, I would say there's something that bonds military families, and that is this service that they have to their country, right? I will tell you, you know, civilians don't always think of we military families as serving the country. I think more and more they're starting to realize that really the service member is kind of the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot of people behind the scenes making that happen. But I do think that even people who disagree very much on this national conversation have common ground, and that is their desire to serve, right? And that is an important value to them, and that even as they make sacrifices to do that, they feel that it is an honor and a privilege to do so. And I think that could be a common place to have a conversation. You know, I think part of finding understanding is talking to people that may not agree with you, you know? So as I'm covering this conversation, and sometimes we have a hard time imagining, well, how are these two sides going to find any common ground? But this is the discussion that is going on, right? In Congress right now, Democrats and Republicans are talking. They're not in the same place at all about what types of measures they would put in place. I think families at dinner tables are split in having this conversation. You know, you call up someone on the phone and you're having a conversation where perhaps you're not on the same page. But when you do have that foundation, that sort of common ground, maybe that is a good basis to start a conversation, and also to kind of be open as you're thinking about this. You know, I think for some people, they feel that it's a difficult conversation to have. Mm-hmm. Maybe taking the listening role, right? That's something, even just as a journalist, I think I see other folks doing it. I know that's something that I'm doing. I'm asking questions that I didn't ask before. I'm trying to be sensitive about how I'm asking my questions. And I'm also at peace with the fact that I don't know the answer to all of these questions, and that the answer from this person to that person is going to be different, but I want to know what the answers are. And that's what I would say about finding common ground.
Yeah, I love that. Common ground can get us so far right now in these conversations. We have a link that joins us all together, which is our military service, and being a military family. I think starting with that thought process, I think people can start to see that the more we address the issues that we're seeing on race, that they'll see as we improve those conversations, even our mission can be better executed. Our families will be stronger for it, and our community will be stronger for it. And I think in finding that common ground, like you mentioned, that joins our military community together, and basing those conversations on that. And like you said, admitting when you don't know, or listening more, and just being open to receive, I think we can go so far. And honestly, I have to continue to commend our armed forces leadership as taking the lead on a lot of those conversations, not shying away from those hard things, and really just putting in the forefront that this is an issue that affects us all, because we have that common ground in our service. So thank you so much for sharing that perspective. Thank you for continuing to give a voice to our military community and sharing the stories as they unfold. I know your days are probably crazy right now with so much coverage. So thank you for all that you do as you serve off camera and on camera for our military community.
Bree, thank you so much for having me. And if I may, just a quick plug for my column Homefront that I write for CNN.com. You can see it at cnn.com/homefront. So you can get an idea of the kinds of things that we're covering about the civilian military divide and about military families. And then you can also send me an email, which is homefront@cnn.com if you have any story ideas or any feedback. Thank you, Bree. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much again.
Joining me now is Alicia Rogers, a TV news producer in Los Angeles, California, former military spouse, and mom to 3 kiddos. Welcome, Alicia. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. This is such an important issue, so I'm excited to weigh in and contribute. Thank you.
Yes, we appreciate it. And you're in LA, right?
I am. I'm in Los Angeles, California, correct.
So now that's a city that has been in the media for racial events like the Rodney King beating and riots in the city. So how has the tension been there recently?
So I guess we consider, I am the media. I'm a TV news producer. I produce a 1-hour newscast over the weekends here in Los Angeles. And it's been a very tense and for me in my lifetime that I can recollect an unprecedented time kind of for me to experience to this degree. Los Angeles has a history, as you mentioned, the Rodney King beating in '92, and so it's been very interesting being able to have some experts come on and discuss, kind of help me understand the difference between what happened then and comparing it to now and what we see now. This has been a really tough time for the country. I mean, just expanding on the last few months, but even into these last few weeks. But there's something for me with it, as much as I don't want to see such pain and stuff like this going on, that it almost feels necessary.
Right.
And we need to address it. We need to handle it for sure.
And then we definitely appreciate you coming on to do this with us, because it takes a lot of courage to talk about a topic like this, a very important topic.
Yeah.
And I know that you have kids and your children are mixed. So how has it impacted your family, and specifically as it relates to education?
Yeah, so I was a military spouse for over a decade, and so my children have experienced that their entire lives. And as you know, the military is made up of so many beautiful people from so many different backgrounds. The diversity in the military community is one of my favorite things. It will always be one of my favorite things. But as far as education goes, with my children being half Black, half white, and moving around the country, anybody listening to this knows when you get orders and it's time to go, you don't really get a say. You just pack up and go, and you make the best of it. And education was always something that I worried about the most. You know, when I'd find out where we were going next, I would look ahead to where that station was, and I would do my research. I'd find the best schools that I could find in that area. I wanted to make sure my children had the best resources, especially if they were picking up and moving in the middle of the school year. And one of the hardest aspects that I found when it came to them is not only not having control where you're going, but I would get them in the best school with the best districts, best ratings, and they look around and they wouldn't see children that looked like themselves. You know, it came at a cost. You know what I mean? Having the best education, unfortunately, sometimes came at a cost of them looking around and seeing predominantly all white peers. And the alternative was, if I wanted them to be able to be in a school with children that looked like them, so they understood that and they had that, it came at a cost for education. And that right there and in itself, that aspect is something really heavy to think through, you know?
Yeah.
But those are the choices that I had to make that millions of actually parents don't even get to make, you know what I mean? That's just the school, the education their children are given, you know? And then as far as moving to different areas, we've moved to some areas that in the Deep South that were, as much as they were already naturally segregated, they also didn't like seeing families that were mixed races coming in there. That was an especially big, like, no thank you, we don't want that type of thing. And so that was handling that adversity and making sure I advocated for my children in the best ways that I could, but also recognizing with my children being mixed, they also have a layer of privilege with that from me.
Yeah.
That I have to acknowledge, you know what I mean? I would be just lying if I didn't say I was thankful for that, but also recognizing that and understanding how that works differently. And understanding how my family and my dearest friends like don't have that, you know, to safeguard their children when they move from station to station and end up in a rough area or an area that's not accepting of them.
Yeah. So my daughter is considered mixed as well.
Yeah.
My husband is Puerto Rican on the lighter side.
Yeah.
So she has been teased for her big, curly, beautiful hair as well. And so have your kids been exposed to bullying when it comes to how they
have. So my boys my kiddos all have their curls too. And my boys specifically they just embrace their gorgeous curls and they have these big, beautiful fros, and I'm in love with it. I'm probably going to cry more the day that they cut it than they will. But for sure, when we moved to the South, that was a big thing that I was concerned about what they would get with that. Not even specifically from a race point of view, but for just the gender roles that you see in sometimes more conservative areas, you know, and so they did. But I think that was one thing where more than ever, it started at home. It was so important for me to remind them how gorgeous their hair is, like what an asset it is to them. It's one of the most beautiful, you know, features on the exterior that they have, besides them being intelligent and amazing and kind and beautiful, you know, on the inside too. So just working to have them embrace that. But for sure, they faced lots of questions. You know, my daughter actually of the three is probably the lightest. It's summer now, so she's caught up, but got it. But she has constantly gotten questions, like shocked when their dad would show up to school for an event, you know, being like, "That's your dad," you know, kind of thing. And so that's been a unique dynamic for her to like explore and address too, with people just other kids maybe not being used to it, especially in those southern areas where mixed families weren't as widely accepted or seen. And getting those questions, being like, wait, your mom's white, your dad's black, what? And you know, I noticed too, it comes down to beyond all this, the exterior, even from peer to peer, even making sure teachers are advocating kind of and representing my children fairly, and all the children in their class too. And it depends on areas you go to, right? So history was a tough subject to kind of sit through, especially when we lived in the South.
Right.
Just because I realized, especially the difference between what I was raised and what I was taught growing up in, you know, in the Midwest, in a probably more progressive area, was definitely not the same things they were teaching my children in 2016, 2017 in, you know, South Carolina.
That's what we teach them at home.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. I mean, there are things in history that I'm learning about that were definitely intentionally left out of our history books, you know, and I've learned it as an adult, and it's been so important to me to make sure that I turn around and I provide my children with that education. Yeah.
Because having the topic at home is absolutely important, because when your kids leave the house, they're exposed to the world, and whatever it is that the world teaches them, they can hear it, but they're going to remember what you taught them at home, and that's what's going to stay with them more and
absolutely
them longer, more solid.
100%.
And so what would you say, or what advice would you give to a fellow Caucasian person that says they don't know what to do to address and combat racism in our society?
That's such a good question, and that's a big one. And I'm so thankful for the opportunity to speak on it, and so I'm not pretending that I won't convey my ideas clearly. But I think as a white person, having tough conversations, I feel like it's time for us to get uncomfortable and address things that because we're not affected by it directly, have so easily, you know, so many white people in this country, even myself included at times, have been able to kind of just ignore because it doesn't affect us directly, right? I know my experience is different. And so that's why I have been, you know, on paying attention to the subject and advocating on it for such a long time. But I think it's time for tough conversations. Like I mentioned before, the military community is full of so many diverse families from different backgrounds, from different races, I mean, the diversity is just one of the most beautiful things that we can, you know, acknowledge with it. But with that, we have to acknowledge that there's still racism, you know, just like with every system, you know, systemic racism is in this, you know, country under every structure possible. And so I would just implore anybody listening to this, especially white people, to think through that, to do some educating, to educate themselves, and to prepare themselves to sit down and have some tough conversations. This is a conversation that you can have, you know, with your friends. So many people, I see so many beautiful friends in the military community of different races, and they're not having these conversations because they're scared to deal with them or scared to approach it, you know? And I think maybe that's something that needs to end, you know, addressing privilege.
Yeah.
That's a hard one, but guess what? I think there's so much misinformation and so much sensitivity around that word that the real definition, the true definition of it, which is really simple, gets kind of like just brushed aside, you know? I am white and I am privileged because of it. And that doesn't mean anything besides the fact that I have not struggled in my life because of the color of my skin. That's what that means. I haven't been followed around a store because of the color of my skin. I haven't not been hired because of the color of my skin. I haven't not been hired because of my name, my beautiful name, you know, like those are things that accepting that privilege and understanding really what it is I feel like opening the door to have those tough conversations. And when you understand that racism in this country from a completely different angle, and understand that we all have a part of it, especially white people have a part of it, addressing this and helping remedy this, you know, the problem.
Absolutely. So it has been trying times, and this is something that I really never talked about outside of my circle.
Yeah.
Right. Being in the military for so many years, there are certain things that are topics that we stay away from, and we don't experience. I personally haven't experienced much of this in the military as far as anything negative, but
Yeah.
I know of some people who have. There's a situation where it could have been that the reason for a certain experience to happen, but I heard it from my peers. I didn't use it as, okay, it's a race thing, because I always want to move away from thinking that. I didn't want to be that person, you know.
Sure.
But there are other cases where I know people who have directly been impacted by race because of their situation and the results of what happened in those situations. So when I was asked to be a speaker on this topic, I started thinking, I was like, man, what examples can I share? But I don't have an example. I didn't have an example to say this happened to me directly so I can speak on it easily.
Sure.
So I was like, okay, let me know how I can be of support. And so I was asked to help to moderate this.
Yeah.
But it's a topic that we all need to speak on and not be hesitant to talk about it. Yeah.
I think that's key. I think what you just addressed there, this is like, I think one of the most important things to acknowledge with racism and any area of this country is this isn't a political issue. Racism isn't politics. You know what I mean? There isn't choosing a side, you know, left or right when it comes to racism. It's either right, you know, for human rights or wrong,
Right.
you know? And I think that's where things get so like, it makes me sad and upset and want to do something about it, that has been so intertwined with politics because it's not a political issue and I'm not okay with letting it sit in there, you know, and that's me on a personal level, that's me professionally. It's so important. I had a friend word it exactly like this: racism is not politics, it's principles, and there's a difference.
Yes.
You know, and I think that is so like right there, just important to acknowledge, you know, that we need to be talking about these things and we need to make it not taboo or like make it you know, your career could be at risk, you know, or you could be at risk of being reprimanded in some way because you speak out about it, you know. So, and that's for sure in the military. I feel like I've seen it 100 times over, you know. I, of course, didn't personally experience anything, but there were specific situations that I watched my ex-husband experience that just blew my mind. And then as a privileged white woman, just wanted to just scream out, you know, and do, I, of course, you know, didn't. I understood how that system worked, and I kind of stayed quiet, but just wanted to just do something about it, and felt so helpless to watch him, you know, and other, you know, his very first command, a very young guy, you know, early 20s, just have him be discriminated against, and him and other minorities in his command by a racist person. That
We're supposed to be one team, right?
Yeah.
It's sad, and that's why I said yes to doing this, because it's a conversation that we need to have.
Yeah.
And we may not be directly impacted by it, but there's so many others who are, and we have to be courageous enough to speak up.
Absolutely.
And facilitate conversations like these, and absolutely appreciate you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Coming up.
We all have a part, and I'm appreciative of getting to be a part of this. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Continue to do what you do. Continue raising those amazing kids and teaching them love and being bold in society to, you know, deal with all the horrible things that are going on out there. Just being courageous enough to going out there and being bold. So that's going to be it for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
And hope to see you soon in another conversation.
Thank you.
Deonte Cole and his wife, Lakesha, has joined us in this discussion on race and disparities in our military community. Deonte is a retired Marine and real estate professional in the Tampa Bay area, and his wife, Lakesha, is an entrepreneur and military community advocate. Welcome to you both.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having us.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. This is a tough topic to talk about, but the reason why we're doing it is because we have to do it. We need to do it. We need to have this discussion on race, especially in our military community. So we'll go on with the conversation. And the first question I have for you is, with the unrest that's around us in our nation and across the world, what are your thoughts as it relates to our military community?
All right, I guess I'll tackle that. You know, Martin Luther King said protest is the language of the unheard, right? So my view of it is, it's unfortunate and it's encouraging. And the reason I say that it's unfortunate is because, you know, it takes such an extreme set of events where a person loses their life and everyone watches it, for everyone to start to have realistic dialogue about the struggles that people talk about and deal with and say are happening on a day-to-day basis. So that's the part that's tragic, that it takes something like this to spark the language and the conversation. The encouraging part is there's a large group of diverse groups of people that are out there speaking about it, protesting, involved in the process. And to me, that's encouraging, because it's the first time in my lifetime that I've seen people of all shades and colors and from all backgrounds going out there and actually being the voice in issue. So that part is encouraging, that the young people have jumped in the game and took the lead and said this is an important issue for them as well.
Yeah, I would have to agree with him. We talk about this often, even more so in the most recent days of George Floyd, and now we have protests that have sort of swept the globe, right? I also think that the encouraging part is that the protests that we are seeing are more racially diverse than previous times, right? But this isn't new to us. This isn't new to our community. No, what I was going to say was that what's disappointing about it is that, you know, Black men and Black women have been, unarmed Black men and unarmed Black women have been killed for years, but there's no video, right? And now in this age of social media where everyone has a phone and everyone's recording everything, people are saying, why is there such an increase in police brutality? And while there is an increase, this is something that we have all lived for our entire lives, right? So I think, with the George Floyd murder, because that's what it was, as gruesome as it is, I think that is the situation where those who may have been so quick to kind of insert a partial narrative of what may have happened or what should have happened, that one, there's no denying, right, what happened. And I think that is the incident that has really woken America up to what we've all experienced and what we've all known our entire lives. And the encouraging part is that the protests are more racially diverse, right? So, we're not the majority in this country. So in order to continue to drive this narrative and move this conversation forward and to get the change that we all want, it can't just be Black and brown people fighting, right? We have to have others fighting alongside of us. So I too have found that to be encouraging, is to see that there's a racial diverse sort of population that are out there in the streets across the world, not just here in the United States, but across the world.
And that's what's encouraging, is just seeing the youth, the younger generation, having that voice. They're bold, they're courageous, and
they are.
Seeing them coming out, stepping up. I saw a little girl, I think she was about 6 or 7, and you probably saw the video, and she was just chanting power, confidence. And it just shows that everyone has taken this to heart. This is their this responsibility across all races, all ethnic background. Everyone is in the fight because they saw it. If there wasn't a video, I don't believe it would have been as big as this if they didn't see it. And with anyone with a heart, if they see this video, this is reason why they are coming out, because they're like, this is a human being. Forget that
I was going to say, I am so proud of our youth, because there was a period where I was like, I'm not sure about this generation, but they have really shown up in ways that, has made a lot of us proud. They're very educated in their position. They're very strong-willed. For the most part, they are peaceful. You see things that are happening on the media, depending on what channel you're working, but for the most part, the protesters are peaceful.
And we have to be grateful for that, because that's what we need. We don't need it to be violent, because then people will not listen, and they won't.
It's a message.
Right. Yeah. And so, what would you say about the reasons why a lot of people haven't been talking about racism up till now?
I would say one of the reasons is that they're uncomfortable, right? They're afraid and they're uncomfortable. Who wants to be challenged on their beliefs? What you were raised to believe and think, and now you're 30, 40 years old and you're starting to realize, no, that's not where I stand. That's not how I want to raise my kids. That's not the world I want to live in, right? And not realizing that you too have contributed to the problem over the years. Someone wants to on their way of life, their choices, what they believe their rights to be, right? And that makes them very uncomfortable. It makes them very afraid.
And to me, it's quite a few layers. I think a lot of people are, it's convenient to not talk about it. It's convenient to not have to deal with it. There's plenty of people who benefit from it. So it's easy to kind of not have that conversation. I think there's a level of guilt that goes along with it. And then I believe that wholeheartedly the narrative is controlled by the majority, right? So if the majority is controlling the narrative, this means that racism isn't something you're born with. It's taught behavior, right? So if we were to say that it's learned and taught behavior, you have to look at how African Americans are depicted in this country from the time that they're introduced to us in the educational system. Or not, right? Because you're introduced into the educational system as an other in a way, right? You've got, a Black History Month as if African American history isn't American history. It puts you as a separate entity.
Yeah, as if it started with slavery, and it did not,
right. So I think when you look at the narrative that's being put out there about people of color across the board, whether it's from school to the media, how it's portrayed, how the movies portray us, how music portrays us, how all the layers of society portray African Americans creates an environment where people don't want to talk about it. And, you know, there is a large segment of society that believes that things are equal. There's a very small group of African Americans who are in athletics and that are in entertainment, but they're the majority of the African Americans and people that we see on TV a lot, right? So there's a perception that, man, all African Americans are doing extremely well. Look at Oprah, look at Michael Jordan, look at these people that we see on TV.
We gave you President Barack Obama.
Yeah, Barack Obama, right? So we have to look at this in a capsule and say, you know, there's a group of people who believe things are equal because the narratives and what they see as representation of African Americans seems to be that we're further along than we actually are.
And I don't think there is a facet of our life, even day-to-day life, where we're not faced with those adversities, whether it's in education, whether it's in real estate, whether it's in entrepreneurship, business, every facet of our life, we're faced with those adversities, and we have to decide as a couple, as a family, how best to navigate situations that our peers can't even fathom having to deal with.
And I've heard that. People are saying, you guys haven't been treated right, and we see that, because I have friends that I speak with, and I'm trying not to call names or anything, but you know, they see the challenges that Black people go through, and they just sit by the side. But I'm going back to something you said earlier, Deonte. You said these people who are not saying anything, it's because they're benefiting from it, meaning that their businesses would be affected if they speak up. So instead of speaking up and possibly losing money, they rather just not say anything, which is totally wrong. More power to them, but really, how can you sleep at night when you know someone is doing someone else wrong, but because you don't want to lose a few dollars, you're just not going to say anything about it, right?
Right. You have friends who have shown that side of them, and there are people who are watching this video right now who have those same feelings and reservations about not speaking out, and it's hurtful, right? Absolutely. It's hurtful because this isn't an issue where you can be neutral on, right? There's no neutral here. There's right and there's wrong, and there is a right side that everyone should want to be on, but there are people and institutions and organizations and businesses who have shown otherwise. And what I say to that is, you know, I had someone who reached out to me to ask me why certain organizations weren't speaking out. And I'm not an official representative of this organization. So my feedback to her was, if you feel as though a business isn't representing this or taking a stance against this issue that you feel is appropriate or necessary, you take your spending power somewhere else. You take your money somewhere else, and that is your right to do so.
Absolutely. And I would pose that question to that business too. I mean, if they're so concerned about how the business feels about it, why not directly send them a letter?
Right.
And get that feedback from them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so for our audience that's watching, what are some of the ways that they have encouraged? Okay, we're gonna have to cut this one. So starting the question over. For our audience that's watching, what are some ways that they can have more engaging discussions about race and police brutality without isolating law enforcement and military members?
So personally, I've got a ton of friends who serve currently as police officers, and I've got, you know, from my many years of service, I've got tons of friends who are on the military side, and I've got total confidence in a lot of them, right, and most of them, right. The big difference is it's going to be uncomfortable. There's no perfect answer. Law enforcement, as well as the military, in a lot of ways, have to be similar to a pilot, right? Nobody wants to talk to a pilot who, you know, where they say 90% of pilots are doing well, but 10% crash, right? How many of us would hop on planes if we thought that 90% were great pilots and 10% crash planes. Not many of us would do it. So if we are to look and say there's a 10% of police or law enforcement or 10% of military that have this type of behavior that are either racist or have these negative connotations, we have to call it out, because it's the amount of power that's in the hands of an officer is substantial. Even as we watch George Floyd, we were watching essentially a man die. We're watching bystanders who have no legal way of intervening that doesn't result in more violence. So if you think about it, what is your recourse or way of protecting yourself from a rogue officer? Is it you fight back? Can you actually work to save your life when in one of those situations? What can you do? And nobody has the answer to that. So the way we engage in it is, we have to use our hearts and minds, right? Everybody knows what right is, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody knows what wrong is. The only difference is how you perceive the individual in that particular circumstance. I almost every year I have a conversation with someone who says, well, what happened before that? What happened? We don't know what else happened in the video, right? There's always a negative narrative and a discussion about that person's background or history, as if you have to be a person with a clean and clear life in all of your life to be able to have the dignity and respect of life, right? I believe that the justice system no person should die on the streets. If they have an opportunity to have their day in court, they should have their day in court. Mm-hmm. How do we have the discussion? It has to be clean. It has to be clear. It has to be straightforward. It has to be uncomfortable. It has to cause people anxiety. But, America's history of pushing it under the rug, trying to act like, it didn't exist, or, everybody should forget about it, hasn't worked to this point, right? So the next move is we have to try something different. We have to allow people of color to be able to control that narrative and have dialogue to where we can say and have communication with people and say, hey, this is the problems that are out here. This is what we go through. And then you have to have people who listen. You have to have people who have an investment in learning our history, an investment in learning us as people, because the truth is we're small, right? We're just over 13% of the population. African-American men are about 6%, right? So my voice, if I talk to every person who's not Black and brown every day, I would never get to talk to them all and be able to and have that exchange of ideas. So I need help from everybody, no matter what their background, who agrees that some of these things are wrong, to participate in that dialogue and to help us deal with these issues, because silence is complicity at this point. If you aren't willing to stand up for something, you'll fall for anything, right? So this is the point where everybody has to stand up and make decisions. What's important to you? Do you want America to live up to the ideals of its Constitution and the things that you say you care so much about? If you do want life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for all people, then that includes us. And that's not an exclusionary conversation. So the great thing about the military and law enforcement type environments is you have a lot of dialogue. In 20 years of service, I talked almost every single day with somebody about an issue of race. In part, we're exposed, grew up in parts of the country where there weren't many African Americans. So when you have those conversations, you're having it at a point where you all have shared sacrifice. You've gone through similar things and you understand each other. So the level of anger isn't so much there because you have a mutual respect. I think the broader America needs to have those same deep early morning, late night conversations to discuss and have an exchange of ideas and understand each other. And sometimes you're not going to agree, but at least you can walk away with respect. And the things that we're seeing on the streets often are a lack of respect. Again,
lack of respect,
copy and paste.
Yes.
Cut and paste your family member or your friends or relative into any of these situations, and would it be acceptable for you in that particular moment? The George Floyd incident, put your mom or your brother or your sister in there. Put his own family member in that position. Would he do that to them? The young man the other day who got shot in the back. Put yourself in that situation. Would he do that to his own friends or family members? The young man who was jogging down the street and they hopped out of the trucks, right?
And hunted him down.
Put yourself in that situation. Yeah. The young lady who was asleep in her home, and the police, Breonna Taylor, yeah, they raided her home, and it's the wrong house. What's the? There's nothing equitable you can give a person to replace that life, and we have to have accountability for when those things happen, and it can't just be that the American people pay out with settlements of American dollars. There has to be more, because that doesn't feel or help the people deal with their grief. So every position needs a level of accountability, no matter what you do. So, and then the jobs where you have the most power should have the most oversight, because they have the highest responsibility.
Awesome. You guys got, no, it's okay. This is a topic that we definitely need to do a deep dive, and you guys did it. Absolutely appreciate it. And, you know, just going back to what you were saying about the military, we have our rules and our regulations. Yes, we do have some issues, because I've known of cases that people felt discriminated against in the military community, but the majority hasn't, and it's because of how we deal with situations like these. We hold people accountable, and if the public sector would do more of that, it would be less of these acts going on with the law enforcement officers. And you said it, they just need to copy what we do in the military and how we hold people responsible, and we'll see less.
But I also think sometimes people think because you're in the military, that gives you a shield, some sort of shield from racism, and that isn't the case. You know, my husband is retired, and he wears his retired Marine hat whenever we go out, and I see firsthand how he's treated with respect because he has his hat on. But the moment he's not wearing that hat, he's looked at as a suspect in some sense. It's not even the same reaction. So the notion that because you have served, that you're somehow shielded from all of this, it's just not true.
When you're in uniform, maybe yes, but when you're not.
Well, I mean, when you're in uniform, you know, the military is a microcosm of what's going on in the regular world, right? So even with all the same ideas and mindsets, the different groups of people from different places, African Americans are still the minority in the military.
Right.
When I was in the Marine Corps, we were a very small percentage of the Marine Corps. And there's still issues. We aren't perfect, because people are people, right? There's biases, there's, you know, treatments that you see that aren't perfect. Not to say that the military has it perfect, but I can say at least the conversation is further along in some areas. But I can't sit back and act like when I get into discussions or I look at some of my veteran pages that it isn't some horrible stuff that's out there. I mean,
spouse pages too. You
know, a lot of the veteran pages I've left because it wasn't about what it should be about. It became a lot of racially charged stuff in there, and a lot of scary stuff, and it's unfortunate. But you know, we're great at talking about the tough issues in the military. We're great at having a quirky or, you know, twisted sense of humor, but we also we base ours in a way that the person who's serving, it's us against them, meaning the enemy against us. And we're not a lot of the same issues that are going around in the normal populace are still permeating inside the military. So we all have a long way to go, because like I said, it has nothing to do with service or what you're doing. It has everything to do with what's in the heart and what's in the mind of people. And that part takes substantially longer, and no policy out there changes those things in their hearts and minds. It takes dialogue, it takes getting to know each other, it takes people of other groups to stand up and make it impossible for a person who is racist to have a platform in an open society. We have to call it out everywhere we see it. We have to say it. We have to, because, you know,
shut it down.
Yeah, because you got to shut it down from every level. And unfortunately, so many people get the opportunity to just shut it and say, you know, not my problem. and I don't have to deal with it. But it's all of our problems because it affects us all.
And that's how we got here.
Yeah.
It's people shunning it, and people saying it's not my problem, or it's not happening to me, or that can't happen to me, and here we are. And now they have to sit in that uncomfortable place, knowing that their inability to speak up and speak out or call it out has contributed to the problem.
Let's talk about the hat.
Yeah, but I'll tell people, some people look at it as I'm being overly patriotic, like, man, he's a veteran who served and he's being super patriotic. But I also realize that unfortunately realize that hat sometimes gives me some protections that I otherwise wouldn't have, right? If a police officer or somebody came up to my window and I've got a retired Marine hat, if he was to kill me that day, at least somebody would have to explain why he killed a American veteran, right? Why he killed a Marine. And that would be one of the few times I get a title of something other than being a Black person, right? As being a person of service. So, but if I didn't have that hat on, you can pick and nitpick at my character. You can nitpick at my history and say and come up with reasons why it was acceptable to do so. But most people would be outraged to see a veteran being killed in the streets senselessly. So, as much as I enjoyed and I love my time in the organization and I consider myself patriotic, I also realize that does give me a level of protection that I shouldn't have to wear something to prove my allegiance to America or my commitment to this country. But there's a difference.
You can feel the energy. You can feel it shift when he's wearing his hat in public and we're walking through Lowe's, or for whatever reason he forgot to grab his hat and we're walking through the same store.
Sure.
And you can feel the shift of energy from how people greet him to how people watch him or us as we're walking through the store.
Sure.
It's an obvious
it's an obvious shift.
That happens when we're in public and when he's wearing his hat over that.
There's tons of microaggressions that happen in our day-to-day life, as everybody else who's African American will know. And those are the things you can't explain away, right? You can't explain what it feels like to walk into crowds of people and recognize that everybody looked at you, right, and is watching what you're doing, right? So, or wondering why you're there or should you be there. So, we went into a store recently and the person says, thank you for your service, and this is probably a person who otherwise would never have a conversation with you.
We went into a gun shop and the guy didn't want to sell him a weapon. And it just so happened to be the day he didn't have his hat.
Wow.
And this guy did everything he could possibly do to refuse to sell him a weapon.
Yeah.
No other reason.
No other reason. There's this, I'm in a gun shop and I have money. I have a clean history.
Yeah, but
should be easy.
Served 20 years.
Of course, but it's unfortunate because people make those decisions, and they, the right to refuse service can be a broad thing, right? That people can, however they see. As you take the uniform off, there are layers of society that you'll have to deal with, and you would imagine, as they talk about the suicide numbers and things like that go up. Well, you would imagine that when a person leaves service and you go back into society and realize that the people that you served don't care about your service or don't care about you as a human being, I would imagine that contributes to that level of hopelessness and sadness, considering what you sacrificed. The military has a check that's payable from everything from time to your life. And that check always comes due. And it's unfortunate that the people who serve it, as did in the Vietnam era, as did in every conflict we've had, they did not get to enjoy all the benefits given to our counterparts in this country as a result of their service. It shows in lending for homes, it shows in loans for small businesses, it shows in land. Everything has been affected for it, and even just basic respect and dignity as a human being. So
that's a great point. Wow. It's a sad thing, but people need to know these are ways that they can definitely consider just be nice to Black folks, period. Not because we're wearing a hat or wearing a uniform, that doesn't make us
Right.
more American than any other Black person walking around, you know.
And because you expect the same level of respect to be extended to you.
Yeah, I think, you know, we're more apt to invite you to the cookout and have you come over and have a good time and be open to all groups of people. And we do it because if we see someone who doesn't look like us, you're even more nice because you recognize what that person
feels like.
potentially feels like
Mhm.
coming into a crowd where they're the minority, right?
Mhm.
So we're overly observant and we're overly nice to a lot of people in their situation. I think the reverse has to happen. People have to start being compassionate about the other person and not saying, I don't see color, saying, you know, I see you and I know that what you're going through is different than what I go through. So I need to be more compassionate and understanding and reach out to you because, you know, there's always this stigma. If two or three of us gather, it draws attention, right?
Yeah.
In any crowd. And it's unfortunate because the vast majority of people don't look like us when they join. It's never even a second thought. So we got to do better. We all see it. We all recognize the behaviors. We all see it happening. It's just whether we want to do something about it. And I think that it's important to be proactively do something about it, not lean back and say we just need to be trained better.
Yeah.
We know what's right. We know what's wrong. Apply it to all people.
Absolutely.
And one thing I noticed just walking on the sidewalks with people, because I walk my dog every day, more people are saying hello, giving me eye contact. And it's not about the dog anymore. They're actually looking at me because usually they're like, oh, it's a cute dog, and they won't pay me any mind. But now they're looking at me saying hello.
I think we've experienced the opposite.
Yeah,
People don't want to look you in the eye. They don't want to look you in your face.
Yeah, here it's a little different.
And we're just 20 miles away from each other.
But you know, short distance can make a huge difference in the mindset of people. So, but I'm on purpose. I'm purposeful in looking people in their eyes directly, and I do it because, you know, as a man and as a human being, I think it's important to look a person in the eye. What I'm finding lately is a lot of people don't want to make eye contact because there's a level of guilt, there's a level of sadness, discomfort. You can feel it. You can feel the tension in the air. But I'm there for the confrontation. I'm there whenever they want to have a conversation. I'm there I don't get to take this off, right? So my engagement with racial issues doesn't go away, or I don't get to mask it by taking a hat off or a shirt off or something. It's always there. It's always prevalent. So I have to be very steeped in understanding it, but also being a chameleon to fit into anybody else's world and situations to make them feel comfortable about me existing. And that's the sad part, is most people spend their lives, you know, being a chameleon who
code switching is what we call it.
Right?
Yeah.
Who shifts the conversation and how they conduct themselves because of the environment they're in. And when other people, I envy their ability to just be themselves all the time, because
we don't always get that opportunity. So we have had to master the art of code switching, of walking into a meeting and making your pitch is right, making sure your walk and your attire is proper, making sure you effectively can contribute to, you know, any conversation, and making sure you don't come off as an angry Black woman, right? Or Black man, because once you have that label, and particularly I've experienced it in this space, it follows you, right? Even when your intentions are pure. And what I've realized is that those issues aren't really your issues. Those are issues that other people have that they've somehow projected onto you, and have decided that they want to label you as that, because they're uncomfortable and they're intimidated. So it's something that we've had to learn and master our whole lives, and we're tired.
It is tiring.
We're tired.
I'm exhausted just hearing the different stories because of people having to switch. And as an immigrant, you know, I came to this country from Jamaica, and it took me a while to get adjusted. But when I realized, okay, this is how it's done to live, this is how you become an American by living this way. But I do my best to just be me, and whether they like it or not, then, you know, because I wasn't born here. So although my category is Black, if it's ethnic groups or whatever, then I'll take that. But you look at me, I am Black. And so people are going to automatically say Black American, which I accept. And then when they hear me talk, they're like, where are you from? They hear the accent. So I am still a minority because I am different and I am Black. But when it comes to me just trying to have a meeting or fit into a crowd, I'm like, this is me. Y'all just gotta take me as I am, you know?
Yeah, and I do feel like, you know, being an entrepreneur has given me a level of freedom, right, so to speak, to where I don't work for anyone else. Therefore, I don't have anyone else to answer to. So how I decide to show up is how I'm going to show up. And whatever energy I decide to bring with me is what you're going to get that day. I do find that, you know, as you get older and as you start to grow into yourself and your beliefs and really start to gain that confidence in yourself, the code, it's a little less code switching and it's more of, this is who I am, like it or not, take it or leave it. But there are quite a few people who still work in corporate America, work in nonprofits and have, you know, regular 9-to-5 jobs where they have to report to other people and have to live up to a certain standard where, you know, unfortunately code switching is necessary for them.
Yeah, and same for me. I'm in the real estate world, and you know, it's an independent contracting type of gig, right? So I work for myself, and I sell as many houses as I'm actively involved in, or I sell none, but I don't report to anybody. I'm not going into the office to answer questions of anybody. As long as I'm doing things ethically and doing it the right way, I'm not answering to anybody. So, you know, I don't have to, you know, bend and flex for anybody. And I think that helped you get to a better place because you don't have that work relationship. Because when you have a work relationship with other people, there's expectation, there's, you know, conduct, there's perceptions, right? And just as much as your skills are important, how you fit in the workplace matters now. So when you don't have those responsibilities or don't have those requirements, it makes it so much easier to just be independent thinking, independent mindset, and do the things that you want to do, because there's no one stopping you or keeping you from doing what you really want to do. So
it's liberating.
Yeah,
it really is.
It is.
That's why I wish more people had that feeling, you know, of what it's like earlier to be independent and have your own. So yeah. Absolutely. And one last thing, because I know we're going long, but this is the last thing I'm thinking about. You know, a few years ago, you know, Colin Kaepernick took a knee, and it was met with significant disdain and people saying that he's disgracing the country and disgracing the flag and disgracing our military. You fast forward to today, it's a completely different reaction. But now people are looking back at 4 or 5 years ago and saying, man, maybe he was right. Maybe the stuff that he was talking about, and it was a very peaceful protest. And the very nature of protest is to make you uncomfortable. It's a protected activity under the Constitution, but the very nature of protest is there's no good or perfect way to protest. Every person who says, you know, you shouldn't do it that way, I've never heard them tell me the right way that they would consider to be appropriate to protest. So the very nature of it is against what people are going to feel comfortable with. But in the end, did his conversation change the needle? No, it actually made people double down on certain things. And this particular one, we're saying it changes the needle. I hope it does. But let's not forget that the people who were integrated into schools are still alive. The people who were sipping from separate water fountains, they're still alive. The first young lady to go to a mixed school is still alive. So this isn't a long ago history of activity. And we also have to realize the group of people who are in power are generally older white people. Yeah. And they are of that generation. So.
And they've had children and grandchildren, and we just hope that mindset is not continuing to be inherited. Yeah.
I hope it gets better. Yeah. I'm not 100% encouraged all the time about it because, you know, we're dealing with it constantly. And in my 41 years, it's a constant. But I'm hopeful that we can be better. I'm hopeful that we can live up to the ideals that we're say are and the rights that are available to all Americans.
And we appreciate you and your input on this, because it is a very important topic within our military communities. Everyone has experienced something, whether it's on the positive side or the negative side, or have seen it and not say anything, or have seen it and said something. So we're happy to be facilitating this talk and to have you. You're an amazing military couple that a lot of people are inspired by. And so I'm grateful to be speaking with you on this topic. Thank you for what you do within the military community, and for entrepreneurs, spouses, Lakesha. And I know Deonte is going to be helping a lot of people in the Tampa Bay area continuously. We appreciate it. And very much for this talk again. And we hope to see you once more on another topic, just covering the issues that are relevant in today's society that will help our community as well.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us, and we appreciate it.
The United States Armed Forces has done some of its greatest work when it demolished barriers to service and opened its ranks to Americans of different backgrounds and identities. Black service members have fought in every single war since America's founding, but were not permitted to serve alongside white soldiers until 1948. The enactment of Executive Order 9981 not only desegregated the United States military, but paved the way for the civil rights movement as well. Before the order went in effect, African Americans had a long history of military service. They fought in wars, even though they faced segregation, racial violence, and lack of voting rights at home. The thing I want to say to everyone that's watching, there is a way that you can help, that you can get involved. It's okay to normalize the thoughts of changing your views on systematic racism. It's okay to stop someone right in their track when you see or hear them making negative talks or comments, or taking actions relating to race in a negative manner. And finally, don't stand in the background, silent. Use your voice. For us, it makes a difference. Make a bold move to stand hand in hand next to us, side by side, as one team against racism and hatred. If you do all of this, you cannot go wrong. Let us all eradicate racism. And if we don't do anything, I encourage you to do all things with love, courage, grace, and gratitude.